Hello and welcome to our webinar about dedicated IPs. My name is Anton and I'm a developer here at Mailgun. I'm leading reputation and spam fighting squad. The primary focus of our team is to making sure that our platform is clear from bad actors and that good customers have all the tools to deliver emails effectively. Well, an IP address is one of the cornerstones when it comes to successful delivery. That's why I'm so excited to share with you my knowledge.
Hey everybody, my name is Lawrence. I'm a developer here at Mailgun. I work on the front-end team, which is responsible for the UI and our other various public websites like documentation, blog, things like that. Today about dedicated IP management.
All right, let's talk about, first of all, what dedicated IP really is. There are two types of IPs, shared and dedicated. A shared IP means it's allocated for a set of accounts and they all send from it. And when an IP is dedicated, it is assigned only to a single account and no one else is able to send from it, as you can see on the slide. And just like that, it allows you to have control over the infrastructure and make sure that your neighbors don't ruin the fun. It is proved that the email infrastructure has a major impact on deliverability. And what deliverability really means is being able to deliver messages to the recipients. Well, because otherwise it can lead to some unwanted consequences, such as upset customers because they haven't received an important email, or overall it can lead to drop in customers' engagement. Well, since some ESPs watch engagement pattern closely, the delivery can suffer even more because of that. As a result, you'll have to deploy additional support resources to fix the problem, which leads to even more losses. However, I want to emphasize that the dedicated IP is no panacea, and there are a lot of other factors that contribute to successful delivery. But all things being equal, it's important to understand when having a dedicated IP is the right choice. To answer that question, we need to look at what problems dedicated IP solves. Well, there are actually three cases where it might be useful. First and most common situation is when you are sending quite a bit of email. So generally, a dedicated IP starts to make sense after 200,000 messages a month, roughly, and we would highly recommend it at 1 million messages a month. Well, for high volume senders, it's very common to have a pool of multiple dedicated IPs. This is pretty common. The second problem it solves is reputation protection. If you don't want to share the reputation with the neighbors, this might be a good option. It's especially useful for mission-critical traffic, such as transactional email, because getting to the inbox is vital in this case. The third use case is related to security. Well, there is SPF, or Sender Policy Framework. It lets you to configure the DNS records in such a way that only messages from a certain set of IPs get accepted. With dedicated IP in place, you can set up the SPF to tell ESPs to reject the messages coming from other IPs. It's a way to guard your traffic against sending domain hijacking when an attacker tries to send emails on your behalf. This is especially important for enforcing some kind of DMARC policy if you decide to do so. So to reiterate, there are three key points that you need to take into consideration when making a decision. There will be volume, reputation, and security. Now, I'm going to talk about real-world example of how it helps with delivery. When we're preparing the presentation, luckily for us, one of our customers reached to us with a question. They recently purchased a dedicated IP and wanted to know how things went. On this graph, the red bars represent permanent failures. As you can see, right after the customer switched to a dedicated IP, which is marked by the arrow, the number of failed attempts dropped significantly. Well, of course, it won't always be the case. Sometimes sending from a shared or hot dedicated IP would get you better results compared to the initial stage of dedicated IP warmup. Speaking about IP warmup, we recently released this feature where our system makes sure that the transition happens, that warming up of the IP happens as smooth as possible. Now let's talk about how Mailgun IP Warmup works. To warm up the IP properly and still allow the domain to send messages, we have to perform some smart traffic routing. Well, the technical details of the algorithm are quite interesting, but in the essence, it puts the traffic through a warming up IP and then gradually diverts it to the hot one to maintain a certain volume. Well, by hot IP, I mean either shared or already warm dedicated. The warming is done in stages, and every stage lasts at least 24 hours. The system controls both daily and hourly volume coming from the IP. It adjusts the routing in real time in order to sustain the desired flow, making sure only the set numbers of messages get sent from warming IP. Well, the rest go through hot IPs when the cap is reached. The stages then make up a warm-up plan. Currently, the warm-up plan that we have has 13 stages. It's arranged in such a way that the next stage cap is a few percent higher than the previous one, which leads to a plan with an exponential progression. Since the stage lasts at least a day, then the fastest it takes to warm up an IP at this moment is 2 weeks. In reality, it usually takes quite a bit more time because it's highly dependent on the traffic patterns. For example, if you have a bursty traffic, we will try to send it a little bit slower to make sure that ESPs are happy. Well, in any case, we don't recommend you to rush through the process, even though we know how excited you might be to use a dedicated IP. Now that the theory part is over, here comes the practice. Well, Lawrence will walk you through the process of configuring a dedicated IP for Mailgun. While he's preparing, I can take a question or two.
Is it okay if I ask a question first?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So while you were talking about it, I was wondering about cases where reputation or security was important, but maybe volume was less than what our recommended number is. Is it still worth it to switch over to a dedicated IP if you're dealing with, if you want enhanced security and reputation for your app or product, something like that?
Yes, this is actually a very interesting and good question that, yeah, someone actually replied that's his question. Okay, so her question. So, yeah, very good question. In fact, it is not important for you to have high volume in order to have a dedicated IP. So what usually happens is that you won't be able to see, for example, if you go to return path and they provide the volume graphs and statistics on each IP. So if your volume is low, then you won't be see the statistics. But during our experience with that, like during multiple years of working with dedicated IPs, we haven't seen a case where a dedicated IP would actually have a negative impact on the reputation, even though the volume is low. So as we discussed earlier, even if you are getting a dedicated IP, is because you want to, for example, set a DMARC policy, and you want to make sure that you're in control of the IP address that you're sending from. That is enough to make a decision and get a dedicated IP. So don't need to wait for while like the volume catches up. Great question.
Thanks. All right, I'll get set up.
Yeah. Yes. Question. When you refer to hot IPs during warm-up as the fallback, are those on a shared pool? So another good question. Yes and no. Generally, I would say 90% cases, yes, it is a shared pool of IPs, because usually when you get an account, you get a shared IP with it. But it's not necessarily the case, because what can happen is that you could, if you have an account already for some time and you have a dedicated IP in place already and you warm it up, so it's considered hot. And in your pool, you can actually remove a shared IP and just send from a single dedicated IP. And say your company grows and now you need to support more volume. Now you have to have 2 dedicated IPs. And in this case, it works just like that. You add a second dedicated IP, and while it warms up, we divert the traffic to the first IP, what we call the hot one, that already has some reputation attached to it. So we will have Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So I will let Lawrence to do the walkthrough, and later we pick up on all the other questions that I see in chat.
Thanks, Anton. I'll jump right in. We wanted to kind of take you through a customer journey through our UI to give you a sense of how you find where the dedicated IP is, assign it, things like that. Really simple stuff. Again, happy to answer any follow-up questions at the end. We are going to take this journey with a company that we really love called Mailgun. It's not a real company, though it should be. The use case, though, is that Mailgun has just launched a mobile application, and their send volume is going up. They passed our recommended threshold, but again, maybe also, as we've discussed, it doesn't necessarily have to be a hard line. It can also be just about taking care of sensitive customer data or having more security concerns, as well as maybe transactional emails, authentication, things like that. Anything that really requires high deliverability, security, and volume, obviously. So Mailgun is going to use Mailgun to do this for their new mobile app. In the UI, you can go and find IP management. It's in the upper right-hand corner of our control panel. This is a one-stop shop for all of your dedicated IPs. We've been talking a little bit about IP Warmup. We're going to go a little bit more into that. But at the very basic is you add a dedicated IP to your account. It's a flat monthly fee. It also comes packaged with a lot of our plans, and definitely recommend that you take a look over those. By default, IP Warmup is enabled. One of the things that we talked about is for this warmup plan is that we really do recommend using this, especially if you're moving from a shared IP. It helps with reputation. It helps with deliverability, all of those things. We've spent a couple of years working side by side with some of our top customers to kind of fine tune the plans for these. Ultimately, I think it will help you as well. So once you get your IP, it will show up within your list. And at that point, normally, we'll go to the next screen because it doesn't really matter. Once you get it, you still need to assign it to your domain before it starts sending. You can quickly add it to a single domain or assign it to all of your domains. Then it will show back up in your list. So here's an example of a company who has multiple dedicated IPs. Once you purchase it, it will come in with that unassigned status. That means that you have the IP, it's just not attached to any domains, then it's not sending. The 2 examples below that, which I'll go into more detail on, are actually about the IP warmup plan. And then below that is dedicated IP that's hot or fully warmed up. And then one that you've either opted out of. If you understand your infrastructure or don't think you need the warm-up plan because of volume, when you opt out, it will just say not required, which is not to say that you're going to suffer necessarily any deliverability loss because of that. All right, so what do these all mean? Here's a kind of a brief overview, the different statuses that we have now, and we're going to be continually improving these. Like I said, not required is for either shared IPs if you see them in the control panel somewhere else, or you've opted out because you know what you want to do with that IP ahead of time. Unassigned is a IP that has a warm-up plan, but it has not been assigned to a domain. So once you assign a domain to it, it moves into the warming stage. That shows what stage you're in, as well as how many emails you've sent in regard to the total volume of that stage. Feel free to follow up with questions too. I'm happy to answer them. Complete is a fully hot or warmed up IP where you've gone through the full 2 weeks of warm up, it's ready to go and is fully utilized. Additionally, you can also manage your dedicated IPs through the API, through any of our supported languages. We have Node and Ruby and all of the kind of major frameworks available. We don't yet have warmup as part of the API management, but we plan on releasing that really soon. So Mailgun, with their new app launch, and Mailgun together now are definitely winning. They're able to ramp up transactional emails and handle the new customer volume, things like that. So good for us. We are really excited about IP Warmup, and this is definitely just the first stage. We'll be rolling out improvements to the UI over the next couple months, as well as refining some of those details as well, providing better documentation, things like that, including in the API. So again, we're really excited for where this goes, and we think it's a great service that we're able to pass down to you from our own internal research. We are going to have visualizations of where your IP is in its warm-up phase, as well as actual volume versus what our recommended volume is. And then eventually we'll be able to work with you to customize or custom tailor warm-up plans specifically for what you need. So that's an exciting feature that we're going to have. Also, as you can see there with the ETA, that's kind of a nod to the idea that if you have constraints or need to change when your IP is fully warmed up, that's something that we'll help calculate with you in the future. So all of this will be available through the control panel as well as through the API. So that sums up our presentation portion. And we really want to turn the mic back to you guys, answer questions, and talk more about dedicated IPs. So our first question is, we are expecting to go over 100K emails per month by September and possibly surpass 200K by this time next year. We're currently having quite a few issues with our emails that people sign up for, ending up in spam folders or being blocked before reaching the mailbox at all. Would it be wise to start looking into a dedicated IP?
Yes, good question. This is more of a general question. So dedicated IP is really just one of the parts of the solution, so to speak. In this particular case, the problem of mail getting into spam folder might not be even related to an IP reputation, because there are other contributing factors such as domain reputation, for example, or email content. But in general, all things being equal, like if we go and see and look at this particular case and see that the content is stellar, it goes and checks all of our best practices. The domain is from a reputable registrar and has a high reputation. Then it is really wise to use a dedicated IP, even though the volume is actually, so to speak, not enough in order to ESPs to really treat the traffic from this IP seriously. And by that, I mean, usually it just comes to the fact that you won't see the statistics on services like return path. But in any case, it could solve the problem. The only point I want to make once again is that don't think that dedicated IP is a panacea that will solve all of the issues and will let any spam go through the ESP spam filter. It's just one of the big cornerstones of proper email infrastructure.
So does the number of emails sent per month have anything to do with the need for dedicated IP if current emails are not being received or bounced?
Yeah, so this is a good question. As I understand, the question is whether bounce emails or permanent failed emails count towards sent from an IP. And yes, they do. But in the reality, we actually you want your bounce rate to be as low as possible. Of course, it's hard to make it go to zero, but generally, if your email, if all of your recipients are double opt-in and they want to receive your emails, you would see bounce rate close less than 1%, which means that even if you see a few bounces, they won't contribute heavily to the volume that compared to the volume that gets delivered. And in this case, you don't even need to worry about that metric, and you can just go with the sent messages. But we need to keep in mind here that, again, bounce rate is a very good metrics for ESP to measure the sender reputation. And so what we would recommend you doing if you have an old mailing list, that you use our validation service in order to clean up your mailing list and actually implement it on top of your sign up or sign up form in order to make sure that when a customer enters their email, they don't make any mistakes and you don't send emails to unknown recipients. And this is part number one. And the second part is that we have a special threshold in place for high bounce rates. So, and this is done for the sender's good, because if the bounce rate go over a certain threshold, ESPs just start blocking this email. And moreover, this IP could actually end up being blacklisted. We make sure that when a bounce rate of a particular domain goes over 5% over the last 24 hours, we have to suspend this domain, because usually it means that some kind of suspicious activity going on. And oftentimes we discover that that's a spammer that tries to actually send out emails unsolicitedly.
What are some things to keep in mind when switching to a dedicated IP from a shared IP? I imagine that reputation management becomes more important. Should we spread out emails over longer time periods, or does Mailgun do this for us? We currently send the bulk of our emails on Tuesdays and Thursday, creating 2 large spikes. I was reading that this is not ideal for reputation management. Anything that is important to do on the technical side?
Good question. So ESPs don't really like bursty traffic. So in this case, yes, having a hot shared IP would actually be preferred in a sense that while you're sending on Tuesday and Thursday, someone might send in on Monday and Friday, and overall it all balances out. And so an IP would see a general steady traffic coming from it, and so ESPs will treat it better. Now, if your bursts are really, really high, then you are actually become this noisy neighbor that we were talking about in the beginning. You might actually impact the reputation of other people, and an IP could suffer some reputation damage. In this case, we would recommend you spreading the volume or somehow configure your email infrastructure so that you send consistent traffic over the entire week. And if you decide to go with a dedicated IP and you attach it to the shared one, it will take you longer to warm up this IP, because we won't let the bursty traffic go through the dedicated ones. We will still follow the IP Warmup plan, because it's really important. Some ESPs have hard-coded caps inside their infrastructure as to how many messages they will receive in a particular day at a particular hour from a particular IP. And so we are trying to emulate that in order to deliver email effectively. And these bursts, they go against that algorithm that ESPs deploy. In our case, we will take just as much volume as needed for ESP to successfully digest, and the rest will go through the shared one. Our emails do not reach certain Office 365 email IDs. Will using a dedicated IP help? As I said, it depends. Each case is unique. So it's a little bit like going to the doctor and to get diagnosis. So it's hard to tell just right off the bat that if a dedicated IP helps, because there are a lot of other factors that contribute to that. And Microsoft is proven to be quite a bit challenging to deliver email to. Generally, I would say that a dedicated IP would help, providing that the traffic is actually fine. Like if the content goes and follows certain criteria, for example, there is a text part, there is an HTML part, the link, there is not a lot of links compared to the text, also not a lot of images compared to the text. It should be fine, and it should go to Microsoft service is fine. Another thing that, as far as I remember about Microsoft, that it takes time to for them to get used to the traffic. So sometimes you can actually see the reduction in delivery when you go to a fresh dedicated IP from a hot shared one. You can at first you can see kind of the dip in traffic where Microsoft sees the IP for the first time and freaks out a little bit and starts to be more risk averse and placing emails to spam folder. Now, what I found with them helpful is that when customers engage with emails, when they get them out of spam folder and reply to them, for example, they look at these metrics, and gradually, if you really send traffic that your recipient want and they interact with it, it will gradually build up the reputation, and sooner or later it will recover, and the dedicated IP will perform just as good, if not better, than a hot one, like than a hot shared or hot dedicated.
All right. What is the relationship between IP and domain? Which is more important?
Well, first of all, it depends on ESPs. Some ESPs, for example, Hotmail, Microsoft, they like Outlook, they look at IP based reputation, so they treat IP fairly seriously. But some ESPs, such as Gmail, their system actually based on domains, and so they place more bet on domain reputation rather than IP reputation, and they also place more bet on things like SPF and DKIM. It seems like unrelated concepts to actual reputation, but the fact that spammers don't set up their email infrastructure properly speaks up volume to Gmail about how to treat this email. So just by merely setting the SPF and DKIM, which is actually mandatory if you get a Mailgun account, you increase your chances of getting to Gmail, and because they look at this stuff. And yeah, like as I said, it depends on ESPs. There is certainly a shift towards a domain-based reputation away from IP-based reputation. It because of two reasons. One, well, they are related. One being that IPv4 pool getting exhausted, and so there is more and more people using shared IP because there is just not enough IPs in the world to send to attach to every unique person. And there is also on the horizon, there is IPv6, sorry, that is going to completely, it's going to be complete game changer because of the sheer amount of IPs that are going to be available. And so what we're seeing in the industry as a whole is that this kind of move away from IP address based reputation to domain based reputation. But this industry is very big, so the move I wouldn't I wouldn't say if it's going to happen overnight. So it's really, really slow process. And as it is now, you have to take care about both domain and IP reputation.
Is diversification important? Is it better to split up email campaigns so each domain has a variety of emails going out?
Good question. I'm not sure I totally get it, but let me explain the best way we found the best way to do that, to split the traffic. So what we found most effectively is splitting your marketing traffic from your transactional traffic. Even have a different subdomains for it. You can have even like marketing.mailgun.com and transactional.mailgun.com, and making sure you can actually divide the reputation as well by dividing the IPs. This is what we found most useful, especially for mission critical emails such as password resets, billing invoices, login notifications, security alerts. It's very important for these emails they are relatively low volume, but it's really important for them to reach the inbox. And it makes perfect sense to separate that kind of traffic to different domain, to different IP. Maybe it's even wise to get a dedicated IP there, set up SPF in such a way that it only allows sending email from this IP. You can go as far as to set up DMARC to make sure that to stop phishing attacks that would impersonate, for example, your login form and send some important alerts or notifications to your customers and try to steal and hijack accounts of your customers.
So what's the difference between bounce and dropped?
Say it again, between bounce and
dropped.
We don't use the term dropped anymore because that terminology was confusing. Well, the bounce usually is a subset of dropped. We can drop an email for various reasons. And one of them, for example, is the bounce could be when a recipient is unavailable and there is just no such mailbox. There is no way to deliver email there at all. And this is a bounce. But sometimes the ESP is unavailable. And we're trying to deliver it, say, for 8 hours. And we reschedule the message and we try to redeliver it. And we got the negative response from the ESP, basically rejection from ESP that it cannot accept the message. Well, we can't hold the message forever in our queue, unfortunately, because we never know when this ESP gets available. So what we do, we drop the message on the floor usually and issue a drop callback to notify you that this message wasn't able to reach the ESP. That would be like the good example of distinction between dropped and bounced.
We have a question from Facebook. How many days will it take to warm a dedicated IP to send good volume?
This slide is a little bit technical, and that's why we didn't include it in the original presentation. But what it basically shows is how our warm-up plan is structured. So as you can see, there's 13 stages. We actually still in the works on adjusting this plan. These numbers came from just the experience and interacting with our big customers and talking to technical account managers who spend day and night watching traffic flow through the system, and so they know a fair bit of they know fairly well what works and what doesn't. But of course, it's still heuristics, because each ESP is different, and they also change their algorithms every now and then. But what we came up with is 13 stages, and each last at least 24 hours. So it means that if you're sending slower than the numbers in this in the daily row, then it's fine. But if you're trying to send more than, for example, what is like 5,000 messages the first day, we won't let you. And doesn't mean that we will stop you from sending that, but we will divert the traffic to a hot IP and send the remainder through a hot IP. So to make sure that the cold dedicated IP gets only 5K this day. And the next day we bump the cap to 6.5, and so the process continues. We basically we do the same. We route just 6.5K through the cold, or should I say warming up IP, and then divert the rest of the traffic to the hot one. Now the hourly cap here is also very important, because as you can see, for example, on 13 stage, the daily cap is 250K. But if you try to send that amount of email just in a few seconds, it would still consider be a daily, and then stop, right? It would still consider it as a daily traffic. But ESPs don't like them. In fact, we know for a fact that they also track hourly. They also have hourly caps in order to disperse the traffic inside the day. And so what we do there is we have smaller caps on the hourly basis, and we maintain the volume whichever comes first, and usually the hourly comes first. And so what we're doing here is we making sure that there is at least 5 to 8 hours of constant send within a day, basically like the working day worth of traffic. And we're first making sure that every hour we send relatively this a set number of messages, and then it adds up to the daily cap, and that's how we complete the stage and move to the next one.
Also, if you opt in for the IP Warmup, you'll see what your cap is in the UI as well. So if you ever need to reference that, we'll always show you what your daily rate is, not necessarily your hourly rate, though we're planning on adding more metrics and more reporting around Warmup really soon. So.
Yeah, that slide you saw with the exponential graph, that was like a sneak peek preview. No one saw it except for you. So thank you for joining. This was our present to you. Basically, this is the direction we are looking forward to enhance this feature to give you complete visibility into IP Warmup. So you actually know what's going on, how many messages getting routed through which IP.
Aside from IP and domain, how do ESPs determine if emails come from the same source?
Interesting question, because it implies that ESPs treat the sources differently. Well, each ESP is different. And as I said, for example, Gmail, they look at domain IP pair, for example. Some ESPs treat just IP as a source of truth. So it all depends on their routing and spam fighting algorithms. But there are a bunch of foot fingerprints that you can see the email. You can break down the email. So there is this SMTP chat, and so for example, you can look at mail from domain, which then later you've seen as a return path header. There is also a signing domain. So when you do DKIM signing, you sign the message with a particular domain, and oftentimes ESPs will actually treat that domain as kind of the unified source, and they would actually measure complaint rate based on the domain, the signing domain of the message. I wouldn't be surprised if some look at like senders or even from header, which could be completely arbitrary, but or message ID also contains a domain name. So these are typically the headers and the things that ESPs might look at. Now, the algorithm that determines the source is up to ESPs, and usually they just go with the sending domain and IP pair, or just the sending domain.
So the next question is there any benefit to having subdomains match the website's address?
Ideally, you want all the domains, at least all the root domains in your email match. So your mail from, your from header, sender, and from all match. Links inside the email, ideally, they would also go from the same domain. Oh, I just remembered. The message ID, the domain portion of the message ID also have the same domain in it. This is an ideal situation. Of course, oftentimes it is not possible. So making sure that at least all domains in headers match, or at least the root domains match, is very good practice. When it comes to links, well, we haven't found a super strong correlation that they have to match your website. But if you use Mailgun and you use click tracking, you actually set up CNAME record. That is just a subdomain of your sending domain, and all of these benefits come automatically. When you don't do any ninja stuff, and you just use our API like vanilla way, we make sure that all the domains I just mentioned match, and also the links inside the email would contain like a subdomain of the sending domain, which works out just perfectly.
The final question is, does the warm-up process differ per ISP, Gmail, Outlook, Yahoo?
Unfortunately, at the moment, we don't distinguish. We don't do warm-up on IP ESP pair, because that would be like the next level for us in terms of implementation. I can't say if we are going to implement it, but if we prove that this is the way to go, so far we've proven that just warming up the IP, not even looking at the domain IP pair, works fantastic. We pulled up reports from return path, and we can see that on the graphs how well ESPs treat such a gentle volume ramp up. Yes, ideally we would, in ideal world, you would want to do that on IP ESP pair, and you would also want to look at the feedback from ESPs, like when they push back, you gently slow down. So unfortunately, We don't do that as part of the warm-up plan, but our queue algorithm that we've been honing for a few years now do actually take some of the things into account. Like, for example, if we see a pushback from a certain ESP, we slow down the rate, but not by slowing down the warm-up process. We're just slowing down the rate to this particular ESP in our queuing algorithm. So you still get you still get that benefit, but not through the IP warm-up process.
I want to thank everyone who joined today. Hope we answered some of your questions around dedicated IP, mostly Anton, because he's brilliant. And we look forward to talking to you guys again in the future. Keep an eye out for improvements to the warm-up and UI, as well as the addition to the API.
Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us.